Alright, well, I've cleaned my room. Roughly speaking. Wait, is that a criticism of Jordan Peterson?
お前はもう死んでいる。何?
Why do I do this to myself? Okay, as my subscribers know, a few weeks ago, I released a video criticizing a couple statements from Jordan Peterson. I got plenty of positive feedback on it, but I also got more hate comments on that video alone than I've gotten on probably every other video of mine combined. A few of my favorites were: how many people have you helped, sanctimonious little boy? I'm willing to listen to you and judge. You just criticize showing how little knowledge or experience you have. When your facade of mental health starts to fail, as your ego realizes what a nobody you are, let's see how fast you run to Jordan Peterson for help. Why is your name Genetically Modified Skeptic? You're clearly not genetically modified. You're being intentionally misleading to sound cool. For shame. Whatever, man, stupid video. Let's talk about somebody's opinion about a symbol, roughly speaking. Don't bother cleaning your room. There were a lot of the same phrases being used in that comment section, mostly being taken from Peterson almost verbatim. Even some of Peterson's less consequential, habitual expressions were copied, like in that third comment. And that was in a comment section of a video where, in reference to Peterson fans, I had already said, "I'm honestly kind of freaked out about the level of parroting I'm seeing here. I'm not saying that this behavior is exclusive to Peterson fans, but wherever it exists, I think it needs to be challenged, or else ridiculous ideas are allowed to propagate without ever being fact-checked." It was pretty surreal to see my suspicions about what the comment section would become be justified and then some. In the response to hate comments, I saw another admittedly less pronounced trend emerge though. People were saying, often probably jokingly, that Peterson's fans were a cult. At first I found those comments funny, but as I thought about it, I came to understand how loaded that statement really is. So are they really a cult? Let's walk through it. The first problem we run into is one of definitions, so to pull a total Jordan Peterson myself, it depends on what we mean by cult. Here I'll go through 3 different definitions of cults and appraise Peterson's fans under each. First off, the layman's definition of cult is something like a social group defined by its religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs, or its common interest in a particular personality, object, or goal. The term usually has a derogatory connotation. A problem with using this definition is that it's so broad that it renders the term cult a weak descriptor. Just about any unified group with common philosophical ideas could be called a cult this way. Essentially, the only thing under this definition that distinguishes cults from everyday religious or philosophical movements is being commonly described negatively by outsiders. Basically, a cult is just a religious or philosophical movement that whoever is describing it doesn't like. With this definition, you could definitely call Jordan Peterson fans which adhere to his teachings a cult, but you could do the same for any religion or any philosopher's followers, so doing so is essentially useless. Scholars of religious studies usually don't use the word cult in this way because it only communicates one's disapproval of a group, but little about the group itself. The verdict, according to the layman's definition, technically yes, but this means almost nothing. On to our next definition, that which sociologist Dawson proposes in his book, Comprehending Cults, the Sociology of New Religious Movements. Dawson says cults are new religious groups, but unlike religious sects, they often form without breaking off from another religious group. What most distinguishes cults from religious sects is that they don't advocate for a return to pure religion, but embrace something new or something that has been completely lost or forgotten. Dawson's cults are also much more likely to be led by charismatic leaders than are other religious groups, the charismatic leaders being the individuals who present the new or lost component upon which the cult focuses. So how do Peterson and his fans fit this bill? Did they form independent of a prior religious group? Yes. Do they embrace either something new or something lost or forgotten?
Well, if we're embedded in a hierarchy, and we have been forever, that's about 350 million years, by the way, is there a set of attributes that tends reliably to move you up the hierarchy? Because if there is, you see, going up the hierarchy increases the probability of reproductive success. And so there's actually nothing more important to determine over the course of 350 million years inside a hierarchy than how it is that you ratchet yourself up the hierarchy reliably. And you could think about that in some sense as the source of ideals.
Yes. Are they led by a charismatic leader who presents what they embrace? Definitely yes. Does this equate Peterson and his fans to well-known manipulative cults like Scientology or Jehovah's Witnesses? Not necessarily. Sociologists Rodney Stark and William Bainbridge identified 3 types of cults based on levels of organization and adherent involvement. These are audience cults, client cults, and cult movements. Cult movements are things like Scientology today, where adherents try to fulfill all their needs through the cult. Client cults are less extreme, where adherents are moderately socially committed and treat the leader somewhat like counselors, like Scientology at the advent of auditing. Audience cults are not formally organized and don't necessarily require significant commitment or involvement, like L. Ron Hubbard's fan base upon the publishing of Dianetics. While Peterson's fans could qualify as an audience cult, it's important to remember here that there's a major difference between an audience cult and the popular notion of a cult, like that of Scientology today. Nonetheless, the verdict, according to sociology, yes, although a mild form of a cult. Now for our third definition, coming from the field of psychology, and the one which I think is most relevant to my audience's ideas about cults. I hope my viewers have heard of psychologist Stephen Hassan's BITE model. You probably have if you watch Telltale Atheist like I do. If you haven't, it's a description of the control tactics which cults often use, and a useful tool in determining whether or not a group is the type of manipulative, harmful influence we often think cults to be. The BITE in BITE model is an acronym which stands for Behavior Control, Information Control, Thought Control, and Emotional Control. The model lists specific actions which cults perform under each type of control. Let's go through those actions to see if those that follow Jordan Peterson could be considered a cult. If I'm wrong about my answers here, let me know in the comments, because maybe you know something I don't. By the way, this list is long, so I'll be skipping over some that I'd answer with an outright no. Behavior control. Promote dependence and obedience. No. While he has published a self-help book with teachings to be applied, I don't think Peterson commands obedience at all. He also seems to encourage independence, for men at least. Dictate where you live, with whom you live. Monogamy is strongly encouraged, but otherwise no. Restrict leisure time and activities. Well, he encourages bearing as much responsibility as possible, but I don't think there's any restriction like this. Here are those that just got an outright no. No yeses for behavior control. Here's information control. Deliberately withhold and distort information. Peterson fairly often makes strong statements, but when later questioned about it, he admits only a weaker form of that statement. Take his enforced monogamy statement. On the surface, it sounds like legally enforced monogamy, which is pretty extreme. But when questioned about it, Peterson said he only meant monogamy enforced by societal norms, not by law. He did the exact same thing with the statement of his belief that DNA was discovered by ancient shamans. So I'll give a light yes on this one. Divide information into insider versus outsider doctrine, somewhat. He definitely identifies an enemy in the educational system run by those he calls neo-marxists and post-modernists, so light yes. Generate and use propaganda extensively. That PragerU video he did is definitely something, but that was by and for PragerU ultimately. I don't think he purposely spreads propaganda, so no on this. And here are others that got an outright no. There's not much here so far. Here's thought control. Instill black versus white, us versus them, good versus evil thinking. I don't see any black and white statements, but there is some us versus them thinking in his appraisal of supposed neo-Marxists and postmodernists. There's also somewhat of a good versus evil narrative in his teachings as well, so light yes. Change your identity, possibly even your name. Again, he published a self-help book, but it doesn't advocate extreme change as far as I know, so no. Use loaded language and cliches to stop complex thought. While I think he uses loaded language, I don't think that he's trying to stop complex thinking in the least. Although a lot of his fans do seem to practice something like this, but ultimately I still have to give this a no. Reject rational analysis, critical thinking, and doubt. Well, this one is debatable. I think what's most important here is that Peterson doesn't outright advocate for faith or against reason. He may not have entirely rational arguments in my mind, but he isn't rejecting rationality, so no on this. And here are the outright no's. Last section, emotional control. Teach emotion-stopping techniques to prevent anger and homesickness. While there's a certain pull yourself up by your bootstraps or tough it out attitude here, I have to say ultimately no. Promote feelings of guilt, shame, and unworthiness. No, he seems to teach somewhat against those, I think. Shun you if you disobey or disbelieve. Some of his fans would probably do this, but no. Finally, here are the last outright no's. Jordan Peterson and his fans don't seem to be any sort of cult according to the Byte model. There doesn't seem to be much, if any, direct manipulation of Peterson's followers as the model describes. The verdict according to the Byte model, no, this fan base is not a cult. If we take a look at all three verdicts, we see one yes which admittedly means very little, another yes which allowed the fan base to be classified as a very mild form of cult, very distinct from the popular idea of a religious cult, and finally a solid no. In the end, it depends on how you define your terms, but if you ask me, calling Peterson's fans a cult does nothing particularly meaningful. In fact, I think it might just create unnecessary confusion. When you call a group a cult, that accusation carries a lot of baggage. People might think that group is dangerous, its leaders are malicious or manipulative, that it actively brainwashes its adherents, etc. If the group you're talking about isn't like that, your statement is misleading. Not only that, but you're also watering down the term cult. When I say Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult, I want people to realize I'm saying it's harmful, that it brainwashes members, that it breaks up families, and even denies its members life-saving medical care. But if the people I'm telling have heard my peers cry wolf one too many times, my message will be totally lost on them. Cult needs to mean something, for the sake of the communicators warning others about dangerous religious cults, for the sake of those who have suffered abuse at the hand of a cult. Don't take the word too lightly. Describe some of Jordan Peterson's fans as fanatics if you want. Some of them definitely are. Just leave the word cult alone until it's really necessary. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. If you like this analysis, make sure you check out the channel Telltale Atheist. It's one of my favorite channels, and he discusses whether or not certain religious sects are cults all the time. As always, praise be unto Adam, my top patron and personal Lord and Savior, for making this video possible. Go ahead and subscribe, check out my Patreon, follow me on Twitter and Facebook at GM Skeptic, and until next time, stay skeptical.